2 weeks from today, we will be watching regular season NFL football and beginning our quest to be fantasy football champions. In this video, we're going to be looking at my final wide receiver rankings and tiers for this offseason. We'll be going through my top 40 receivers, and as a bonus, I'll be throwing in a couple sleepers that I'm targeting late in drafts. So we'll start with tier 1. These are wide receivers who can carry the scoring responsibility of your team on a weekly basis, and like the name suggests, go and win you your league. These guys have the realistic potential to finish as the number one wide receiver and a top player in fantasy as a whole. So honestly, nothing has changed here since the start of the summer. The tier 1 receivers for me are still Ja'Marr Chase, Justin Jefferson, and CeeDee Lamb. Ja'Marr is the best number one pick in fantasy I've seen in years. There's a very real chance he does finish as the number one wide receiver again this season, considering the Bengals offense is going to have to put up a lot of points since the defense still looks like it's going to suck. And Jettas and CeeDee at 2 and 3 are kind of interchangeable for me. They're kind of like a 2A and 2B. Jettas does have some question marks with the recent health of his hamstring, and we still don't know what JJ McCarthy is going to look like in Minnesota, but he was the PPR wide receiver 1 in 2022 and the PPR wide receiver 2 last season. So let's not fade one of the great wide receivers in the league. And we're also not fading CeeDee Lamb. This is a guy who finished as a wide receiver 1 2 seasons ago, and he has Dak back. So we're going to just jump quickly to tier 2. These are receivers you can confidently start every single week, regardless of their opponent, and expect elite level production. So these are guys I view who can realistically finish as top 5 receivers. And in my eyes, all 5 of these players in this tier are worthy of a back half first round pick. And I'm not going to dissect who belongs above who within this tier. You're off to a phenomenal start drafting any of these high upside wide receivers. And if you can start your draft with 2 of these guys in the first and second round, in my opinion, that's a home run. So I'm briefly going to touch on all of them, starting with Amon-Ra St. Brown. Amon-Ra finishes the wide receiver 3 in PPR each of the last 2 seasons, and he's only missed 2 games in his 4 seasons in the NFL. You're getting a dependable, legit wide receiver 1 in Amon-Ra, even with the departure of Ben Johnson. And my projections actually have Amon-Ra as a 3rd highest scoring receiver in both standard and PPR formats for this season. And speaking of projections, you can now get your hands on my AI-driven projections through my fantasy football draft guide, which is now available to the public. This guide has all my rankings, notes, projections, and so much more. Let me do the work for you and provide you with the players you should be betting the house on and guys that we should not be drafting. As a computer scientist, I've created advanced AI and machine learning models on top of my countless hours of research that could give you the winning edge this season. So secure your guide by emailing me, messaging me on X, or just commenting down below. The price you pay today is the price you pay for the rest of your life. So as I hike up the price as this channel grows and introduce new models, you will always pay what you pay today. And since this is the first summer of Yam Talks, I'm going to be giving out one guide every single video for the rest of the summer. All you have to do is subscribe, like this video, and tell us your dark horse number 1 wide receiver in the comments down below. And a week from today, I will choose a winner from your comments. So sticking in this tier, the next wide receiver is Malik Nabers. The upside with Malik Nabers is unreal. He only played in 15 games last season and finishes the wide receiver 6 in PPR as a rookie, with Daniel Jones, Tommy DeVito, and Drew Lock throwing him the ball. So there's 3 new quarterbacks in New York that are all upgrades over this guy, and Nabers is still the number 1 receiving target on this offense by a mile. So look for him to build off his rookie season, where he had the 2nd most targets at the wide receiver position last season, only behind Ja'Marr Chase. And then another player with immense upside is Nico Collins. The Texans defense is honestly kind of suspect entering the season, so we should expect CJ Stroud in this offense to carry the burden of racking up touchdowns every week. And that means Stroud is going to be looking towards Nico Collins a lot, and volume equals fantasy production. And in a receiving room where Nico Collins is the bona fide top dog, he is going to produce. The only potential obstacle in the way is if Stroud struggles again this season behind what is one of the worst O-lines in the league. But I'm not fading Nico Collins. I love him at the end of the first round. And then next up, we'll move on to Puka Nacua. So Puka Nacua finishes the PPR wide receiver 4 as a rookie, and he was on pace to finish as the wide receiver 3 last season, but he ultimately missed 6 games and finishes the wide receiver 26. So we can expect Puka to have a monster season as long as he's healthy, and I think he does have the upside to really be a legit top 5 receiver if Matt Stafford is healthy. We're going to have to monitor how the Stafford back situation does pan out. But I think even if Jimmy G is quarterbacking the Rams offense, Puka's floor is still around wide receiver 12. And I still definitely see him finishing as a wide receiver 1, even if Stafford doesn't play the whole season. And the last player in this tier is Brian Thomas Jr. BTJ put the league on notice as a rookie last season, finishing as the PPR wide receiver 4 in honestly a terrible Jags team. So the Jags offense is expected to take a major leap this season under Liam Cohen and a healthy Trevor Lawrence. So don't let the addition of Travis Hunter sway you from drafting BTJ. BTJ is elite, and he's already earned his claim in this tier. And then next up, we'll move on to tier 3. So tier 3 consists of players we can expect to finish as top 10 to top 12 wide receivers. And these guys are going to produce impactful production on a weekly basis. So we're going to kick this tier off with Drake London. Drake London broke out last season, finishing as the wide receiver 5 in PPR, playing in all 17 games. The Falcons really haven't done anything this offseason to threaten his wide receiver 1 spot on this team. And he's going to see the lion's share of targets for either Michael Penix or Kirk Cousins, whoever's throwing him the ball. I don't think we're going to see him finish as a top 5 receiver again, considering he did play in all 17 games last year, and Michael Penix might have some growing pains throughout the season, but I still really like him as a top 10, top 12 wide receiver on a Falcons team that I honestly think is going to be a lot better than people have them projected right now with a really favorable schedule. And then following Drake London, we have A.J. Brown. So A.J. Brown is probably a top 8 receiver in the NFL, but the way the Eagles now operate with winning the Super Bowl by just being run heavy kind of caps his ceiling. A.J. Brown finished as a top 6 PPR or top 6 wide receiver in PPR both in 2022 and 2023, but he did miss 4 games last year and finishes the wide receiver 20. So there are some concerns right now with his hamstring, but putting all that aside, he's a very solid wide receiver target in the middle of the second round, and I do expect him to have some really monster weeks that could win you your fantasy weeks. And then next up is another rookie that bought last season. That's Ladd McConkey. Ladd finishes the wide receiver 13 on a run-heavy Chargers team last season. He's still Justin Herbert's number 1 target entering the season, which I think should make him a PPR monster. But I do think his ceiling is capped at being like the wide receiver 10 or wide receiver 12, considering this Chargers team is super run heavy, and that's not going to change this year with the additions of Najee Harris and Amari Hampton. But I think Ladd McConkey is a super safe pick. I just don't think you can bank on him having a crazy league winner type season. I really, really like him as a wide receiver too if you're going 2 wide receivers in the first 3 rounds. And then speaking of wide receiver 2s, next up we might have the best wide receiver 2 in the NFL, and that's T. Higgins. I'm all over the Bengals offense this season for fantasy purposes. T was on pace to finish as the wide receiver 4 in PPR last season had he not missed 5 games. And like Jamar Chase, T. Higgins is going to see a lot of volume, and Joe Burrow can definitely sustain 2 elite fantasy wide receivers. Plus, if Jamar were to, God forbid, ever miss any time, T. Higgins immediately jumps up at least 1 tier. And then next up we have is JSN. So JSN is now the clear-cut wide receiver 1 in Seattle. We started to see the torch being handed off to him last season and he shined, finishing as the wide receiver 9 in PPR. So he should see a ton of targets this season in his 3rd season in the NFL. As long as Darnold isn't a complete flop, JSN definitely has another top 10 season in him. And the next is a player I have in this tier, honestly out of respect, and that's Tyreek Hill. If I'm being honest, I'm avoiding Tyreek Hill at all costs. The concern is real with his minor injuries, the recent drama in Miami, and Tua potentially being one head injury away from a career-ending injury. But we've seen Tyreek finish as the wide receiver 2 in 2020, 2022, and 2023. Therefore, that recently fulfilled potential has to land him in this tier. And he's the definition of a boom or bust pick here in the 3rd round. And finally, we have 2 players in this tier I'm really high on this season. That's Marvin Harrison Jr. and DJ Moore. Maserati Marv was taken 4th overall last season by the Cardinals for a damn good reason. The Cardinals will find a way to get him the ball this season and unlock the demon within him. And I truly believe that we will see Marvin Harrison go in the 1st round of fantasy drafts next year. So enjoy him at this discounted price while you can as your wide receiver 2, maybe even your wide receiver 3. And now with DJ Moore, he finished as a wide receiver 16 last season in what was a bad Bears offense with a struggling rookie Caleb Williams. But 2 seasons ago, in his 1st year in Chicago, he was a wide receiver 6 in PPR. So now you have Ben Johnson coming in, and to be honest, DJ Moore can be used in a super similar way that Amon-Ra St. Brown was in Detroit, and we know what Ben Johnson did in Detroit with Amon-Ra. I think the upside is unreal with DJ Moore in the 4th round where his ADP puts him. You'd be getting a top 12 fantasy receiver for a steal. So we'll continue on to tier 4. These guys are capable of being starters on your fantasy team. I think there's going to be weeks where they are one of the best players at the position, but there's also going to be weeks where they don't have elite production due to their matchups or other factors. And these receivers have the realistic potential to finish as top 15 to top 24 players at the position. So the first player in this tier is Rashee Rice. And honestly, if there wasn't a suspension floating around his head, he'd easily be in a higher tier. He was on pace to finish as a wide receiver 6 in PPR last year before the season-ending injury. But the truth is that the suspension is going to keep him from finishing as a top 14 receiver this season, whether it be 4 games or 6 games. But in the games he will play, expect Mahomes' number 1 target to be a bona fide wide receiver 1 for fantasy. Next up, we have Mike Evans. Mike Evans is one of the best wide receivers to touch a football field over the past decade, but the days of him being a wide receiver 1 in fantasy have likely come to an end. I would not be surprised to see Mike Evans finish around wide receiver 16 this season, but with him just turning 32 and the number of high-quality options to feed on this Tampa offense, this tier does feel a little more appropriate. I wasn't the biggest fan of drafting him, considering his ADP puts him around guys like Marvin Harrison, DJ Moore, Chuba Hubbard, Travion Henderson. But with the recent injuries to Jalen McMillan and Chris Godwin, I don't hate taking him where he's going. And you never know. If anyone's going to defy Father Time, it is Mike Evans. Next up, we have a player I'm fully fading, and that's Garrett Wilson. I'm not fading the talent. I'm fading the situation he finds himself in with this Jets offense. But the talent and his talent and position as a wide receiver 1 on the Jets definitely keeps him in this tier. If you want the full breakdown of why I'm fading Garrett Wilson, make sure to check out my video on wide receivers to avoid, which I'll have up at the corner of your screen. But yeah, I'm not drafting Garrett Wilson anywhere in the top 4 rounds. And the next one may surprise some people, but I have Terry McLaurin here because I really don't like what's going on with the whole contract situation. With Terry Uri investing a 3rd or 4th round pick in a player whose future is up in the air. Furthermore, Terry hasn't been able to practice with the offense all summer, and it's a recorded fact that training camp holdouts increase injury rate for players because of their lack of football conditioning, and the risk of injury is twofold for a guy who's turning 30 in a few weeks. And then next up, we'll move on to another vet, and that's Davante Adams. I was actually a massive fan of Davante Adams as a wide receiver 2 for fantasy earlier this summer. This is a wide receiver who hasn't finished outside the top 11 at his position since 2019. And he's also finished as the number 1 wide receiver in 2020, number 2 wide receiver in 2021, and number 3 wide receiver in 2022. But if Matt Stafford does miss some time due to this lingering back issue, I think Tay gets severely nerfed. Like I said earlier, I think Puka, being the Rams' top receiver, will still have a wide receiver 1 season, regardless of who's in at quarterback. But Tay's going to need those touchdowns he specializes in if he wants to finish as a wide receiver 2 in fantasy this season. But if Stafford does play most of the games this season, Tay can definitely be a top 20 fantasy receiver. And after Tay, we have Courtland Sutton. So Courtland Sutton finished as a wide receiver 15 in PPR last season, enjoying his best fantasy season with rookie quarterback Bo Nix. And now he's got a fat 4-year contract extension, which honestly makes me a lot more confident in targeting him around that 4-5 turn. I think he's going to be a really solid wide receiver 2 for fantasy this year, but I would not be comfortable with him as my wide receiver 1. I don't think there's top 12 potential here with Courtland Sutton. And then next up, we have our first rookie on this list, and that's Tetairoa McMillan. I've been targeting T-Mac heavy in all my drafts. The optimism surrounding the Panthers offense is out the roof right now, and a lot of that has to do with number 8 overall pick McMillan. This is a more than capable Panthers offense that is likely enough to carry the team, considering the defense was historically bad last season. If T-Mac sees a high volume of targets, we could see a fantasy outing like Malik Neighbors last season in New York. He's constantly been moving up my rankings throughout the summer as he continues to solidify himself as the number 1 weapon for Bryce Young in Carolina. And T-Mac is the perfect wide receiver 3 target with definite wide receiver 2 upside and fringe wide receiver 1 upside. Next up, we got DK Metcalf. So the Steelers don't really have any elite receiving options outside of Metcalf. And in the past, we've seen Aaron Rodgers sustain wide receiver 1s in fantasy by constantly targeting his best receivers. And we saw this just last year with Tay. As long as Rodgers is on the field, I suspect we'll see him feed DK. But Steelers OC Arthur Smith is notorious for nerfing the heck out of his offensive players, which is super frustrating for fantasy. And it'd be kind of silly to say that we're safe from any in-season drama with a 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers. DK feels like he's going to be a streaky wide receiver for fantasy this season that could still finish in the top 24. And next, I'm going to talk about Zay Flowers real quick because the other 4 remaining receivers in this tier can kind of be grouped and talked about all at once. So Zay Flowers is the wide receiver 1 in Baltimore, but that's not super reassuring for fantasy because this Ravens offense is super run heavy through Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. The nature of that offense honestly caps Zay's fantasy ceiling as being probably like a top 16 wide receiver in fantasy. And if you need any proof of that, he finished the wide receiver 25 last season, playing in all 17 games. But he's still the wide receiver 1 in one of the league's best offenses, and I do expect him to finish somewhere around that wide receiver 24 mark. I think he's best viewed as a flex option. So now we're going to talk about Devonta Smith, Jameson Williams, Jordan Addison, and George Pickens. All 4 of these guys are the wide receiver 2s on very promising offenses, and they all share an ADP between the 5th and 7th round. I honestly like all 4 of these guys as your wide receiver 3 or flex targets. They all offer some really enticing upside for where they're being drafted. There's a high chance we'll see at least one of these guys finish as a wide receiver 2 in fantasy this season. We saw Addison and JMO finish as the wide receivers 21 and 22 last season. Also, I did go back and forth with including Addison at the end of this tier because of the 3-game suspension, but looking at last year's fantasy data, 5 wide receivers missed 3 games or more, finished in the top 24. So it's definitely doable in this really high-powered Vikings offense. Next up, we're going to move on to Tier 5. So Tier 5 receivers are guys you may start based on exploitable matchups, bye weeks, etc. You're going to expect respectable production from these players, but not week-winning production. These guys have the realistic potential to finish as top 24 to top 36 players at the position. So honestly, I had a really tough time deciding if I should include Ricky Pearsall and Calvin Ridley in Tier 4 or Tier 5. So if you tell me they should be in Tier 4, I'm not going to argue with you. First of all, I'm really high on Ricky Pearsall this season. I've been targeting him in basically all my drafts along with Tedero McMillan. As of right now, Pearsall is the wide receiver 1 in the Shanahan offense with Debo gone, Ayuk out at least till October, and a lot of uncertainty around Jawan Jennings. He is also a first-round pick selected by Shanahan, more than capable of filling in those shoes. So we got a glimpse of what he could do as a wide receiver 1 over the last 2 games of last season, where he dropped 28.7 and 18.9 PPR points. Please trust me when I say this, draft Pearsall where his ADP puts him, and you'll thank yourselves later. Now with Ridley, it all comes down to Cam Ward. Ridley finishes the PPR wide receiver 28 last season, playing in all 17 games, and it looks like he is getting a major upgrade at quarterback. If Cam Ward and Calvin Ridley display a really strong connection throughout the season, Ridley could easily finish as a top 24 receiver in fantasy, but if we do see some growing pains out of Cam Ward, or if some of the other rookie receivers they brought in really stand out, I can as equally see Calvin Ridley finish at around wide receiver 30. Next up, we have Jerry Jeudy. So Jerry Jeudy had a career year last year, finishing as a wide receiver 12 in fantasy. But a lot of that was honestly fueled by Jameis Winston kind of just heaving the ball up to him like we know he does. I'm not confident we're going to see a top 20 finish out of Jerry Jeudy again this season, considering this Browns team is going to be figuring out who to play at quarterback throughout the year, and they have a really tough schedule. And moving on to Rome Odunze, he is by far one of the most high upside players in this tier. The upside here stems from Ben Johnson coming to Chicago and hoping to improve Caleb Williams. When you pair that with the talent that made the Bears draft Rome 9th overall, we could see a wide receiver 2 season out of Rome. There's always the reality that things don't pan out the way we want them to after a disappointing rookie season, and that will keep Rome out of the top 30. And like I said earlier, I am hesitant to draft Tyreek Hill, but I'm even more hesitant to draft Jalen Waddle. I would not be confident at all walking out of my draft with Jalen Waddle as my wide receiver 2, especially with the real concern we do have with Tua's injuries. He has not finished as a top 30 PPR receiver in 3 seasons, and even 2 years ago when Tua was healthy, Tyreek finished as a wide receiver 2. Waddle was like the wide receiver 34 in fantasy. So guys going around Waddle that I'm for sure drafting over him are George Pickens, Rome Odunze, Matthew Golden, Ricky Pearsall, Jordan Addison, and Emeka Egbuka. So following Waddle, we have Jacoby Myers. This tier is so challenging for me to rank because of guys like Jacoby Myers, Ricky Pearsall, Calvin Ridley, and Rome Odunze. There's really strong PPR upside with Jacoby Myers being the wide receiver 1 for Geno Smith in Vegas, but I do see this offense running through Gentry and Bowers most of the season. With that being said, in the 8th round, Myers is a great bench target for a guy who was the wide receiver 19 last season in PPR and can easily fill in for you at that flex position. Next up is Xavier Worthy. So when I first sat down and made my rankings months ago, Worthy was right around wide receiver 25 for me with Devonta Smith, with JMO and those guys. But a lot of that had to do with how great he looked. There's a lot of recency bias from how great he looked in the AFC Championship and the Super Bowl. But we do need to realize in games of that scale, Mahomes had to get the ball to someone on the field with Rashee Rice out and Kelsey out of his prime. Then I also remembered how much of a non-believer I was in Xavier Worthy throughout the whole draft process, and for very good reason, if I must add. But I've came back down to earth on him. I'm sure there are going to be weeks that Rashee Rice sat with suspension where Xavier Worthy is a top 24 receiver in fantasy, but I don't think we'll see a season-long top 24 finish for Xavier Worthy with Rashee Rice on the field and the addition of talented rookie like Jalen Royals. And from the Chiefs to the Bills, we go to Khalil Shakir. Khalil Shakir finished as the the wide receiver 37 in PPR last season in Josh Allen's MVP campaign. There's a real chance he takes a jump this year and finishes right around wide receiver 28 or wide receiver 30 in a really strong Bills offense. But I think the fact that we saw him finish as a wide receiver 37 and arguably Josh Allen's best season in the NFL, and the fact that he's never cracked the top 24 really solidifies him in this tier for me. And then next up, we have one of my fades, and that's Chris Olave. I simply don't think Rattler or Shaw can sustain a weekly starting receiver for fantasy purposes this season. If you want a full breakdown of why I'm fading Olave, make sure to check out my wide receivers to avoid video. That will do a much better job of justifying this stance. And then we're going to end this top 40 ranking with two high upside rookies that I'm all for drafting in the 8th and 9th rounds. And those are Emeka Egbuka and Matthew Golden. And before some of you run in the comments, yes, Travis Hunter is not in my top 40. So beyond the insane training camp hype we've seen with Egbuka this summer, he's now the wide receiver 2 in Tampa, with Godwin expected to miss a few weeks and Jalen McMillan suffering a brutal injury. This is a really high-powered Tampa offense that has showed us how valuable Godwin was for fantasy from the slot, and we should expect Egbuka to fill in that role till Godwin returns. And if Egbuka takes the league by storm in the first few weeks, they may never look back. And with Matthew Golden, you have the first wide receiver Green Bay's taken in the first round since 2002. He was a beast at Texas who could finally provide Jordan Love with a consistent wide receiver 1. And that is something I am jumping on with the inconsistencies and injuries surrounding guys like Jaden Reed, Romeo Dubes, Dontavian Wicks, and Christian Watson. So that is my top 40 receivers. If you want to see the rest of tier 5 and the rest of my rankings, make sure to hit me up about my draft guide. But before we wrap this one up, I'm going to throw out some sleepers I've been targeting late in drafts. First up, we have Josh Downs, who's currently going in the 10th round. Josh Downs finished as the wide receiver 35 in his sophomore year last season, and it appeared he was just a legit NFL receiver. I do think with Daniel Jones and that quarterback, we might see guys like Tyler Warren and Josh Downs benefit in comparison to if it was AR. And with a low investment in the 10th round, there is some wide receiver 3 upside here. Next up are Chargers rookies Trey Harris and Keandre Lambert-Smith. Both of these guys are players to monitor, take flyers on late in drafts. Someone has to step up as Justin Herbert's wide receiver 2 this season if they want to take that jump. And whoever that is going to be really fantasy relevant. So with the low investments with both these guys, I would be leaning Trey Harris, but considering he was the higher pick for LA, but Keandre is a very solid best ball target as well in the last 2-3 rounds of drafts. Next up is a very interesting rookie, and that is Deontay Thornton Jr. for the Raiders. So the Raiders drafted Jack Bech in the 2nd round and Thornton in the 4th, but I swear from everything we've seen this summer, you'd think it's the other way around. Thornton has home run speed coming out of Tennessee. He had a really impressive combine, and even the Raiders have been raving about him a lot this summer. And even in the Raiders preseason games that I have watched, no matter who was in at quarterback, they were targeting Thornton a lot. So grab stock on this guy with those end of draft picks. And if he's not all that, you can just cut him with not much invested into him. But if he booms, you're going to be really happy you drafted him. So that is my final wide receiver rankings for this summer. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Check out my running backs videos. I'm going to have my tight end and quarterback rankings out over the next few days. Good luck with your fantasy drafts, and I'll catch y'all later.